better see what else is on
Two
there.
of them are me, so there you go.
How did you even find? You know what? I don't know. Okay,
All I
so
did was click their names. So it's not like they searched. I just clicked on your name to see all the videos.
Whatever,
you had in
man.
class.
Okay, right. All right, so yeah, let's talk about jQuery. Okay, so I'm ramping myself up. Let's talk about jQuery. So when you do something with jQuery, I talked about this earlier. If I wanted to get every H2 on the page, I would just do $H2. So there are two ways you can write jQuery. One is with $, and if you've used jQuery before, you probably did it that way. The other way is by actually writing jQuery H2. Whoops. There. They both do the exact same thing. So $, is the exact same thing as actually writing jQuery, lowercase j, capital Q. And so as you can see, what this does is basically the exact same thing as document query selector all, H2. It just gets every single H2 element, just like that. Since you guys have had the prototypes and constructors class, I just want to talk really quickly about what actually is going on when you do this. But before I talk about that, let me just talk about the $sign for a second. So $sign looks like all mysterious and weird, like some sort of jQuery specific thing. It's not. $sign, as far as JavaScript is concerned, is just a regular old character, like H or W. So you can make your own $sign function if you want, and then I can say like cash money, and then if I run this page, I can just type $sign, and I get cash money. So jQuery just happens to use $sign. You also may have heard of _JS, which is another library. It uses underscore, which is where its name comes from. And so same thing. I can do underscore and call it, and I get cash money. So that $sign is nothing special. It's just a character that jQuery uses because you're not likely to use a $sign for other things, so they can sort of claim it without causing too many problems. When you do something with it, so when I do, say, $H2, what I get back is this jQuery object. And let me show you really quickly the difference between that and query selector all H2. Okay, so you can see that they are two different constructors. One is this like jQuery.fn whatever. The other is this node list thing. So they both look pretty similar. They're both basically just a bunch of HTML elements, but they have slightly different properties. If I look at one of these, well, if I look in here, I can see all of these jQuery methods in here. This is like every method you have access to in jQuery. There are a lot of them. jQuery comes with a whole bunch of stuff. Whereas in here, it has far fewer methods, as you can see. So jQuery gives you a whole bunch of stuff. Whenever you use this $sign thing, it's giving you a jQuery object. So there are jQuery objects and there are DOM objects. There are jQuery objects and there are DOM objects. And they are slightly different from each other. The jQuery objects have way more methods. Yeah, so when I do $H2.html, well, that's kind of weird. It's only giving me one thing, whereas when I do just H2, I can see there are 5 different things. When I do $H2, it's giving me this collection back of jQuery objects. When I call .html on it, that's just as if I were to use inner HTML. So let me write that up here. As we go, I'm going to write things equivalents in jQuery and in regular old JavaScript. So $sign is like document query selector all. .html is like .inner HTML in regular JavaScript. So you may be wondering, like, why not just do this .inner HTML? That's because this won't work. So the thing about a jQuery object is that it only can use jQuery methods. Whereas a regular DOM object, not a jQuery object, can't use jQuery methods. So you have to sort of stay on one side of this table. If I do document query selector h2 and then I try to do HTML on this, it's not going to work because .html, that only exists for jQuery objects. In the same way that .inner HTML only exists for regular old DOM objects. So they're slightly different things. What I'm getting at here is that you can't really mix vanilla JavaScript and jQuery because you might have sort of a bad time of it.
Is that per line or once you push the semicolon, are you able to?
Yes. So when I say you can't mix, what I mean is in jQuery you have all these methods. So you'll have something like $.html, some other jQuery methods like fade out, let's see, what else? CSS. These are all different jQuery methods you can use. This will work fine. You can sort of chain together jQuery methods like this. What you can't do is $.inner HTML, .fade out, .css. You can't do something like that where you have some HTML you have some regular vanilla JavaScript smushed into the same chain. So I would say the rule is on any one line of JavaScript, you have to use either jQuery or JavaScript. You can't have both jQuery and JavaScript on the same line. When I say on the same line, I mean just like this. You of course can have something like, if .html equals, 32. That's fine. This is just like comparing strings to numbers. This is not like, I don't mean this. I mean, this is something you cannot do. This is perfectly fine, but this is something you cannot do. Yeah, I'll tell you.
Can I set the jQuery the variable and use the JavaScript?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can do something like var h equals h2. And now I can do stuff like h.html. It's a jQuery object. So yeah, I can absolutely do stuff like that too. Is that what you were asking?
Can you use that h inside a function like another JavaScript function?
Yes, absolutely. So that's also fine. So I can go down here and then I can do something like function change h2. And then, so this is just like regular old vanilla JavaScript so far, but I'm going to do some jQuery inside it. h2 HTML subfatai. So there's some jQuery inside some regular JavaScript, and that's perfectly fine. If I do change h2 right now, it's going to change every h2 on the page to subfatai, and that's fine. But what you can't do is something like h2.inner HTML. So when the things are like just separated by periods, you can't mix jQuery and vanilla JavaScript together. Any questions about that? Yeah, Max?
When you say that, do you mean one style sheet, or do you mean
Style sheet.
One script?
I really just mean on one line. So like, and even that's not really the right way to say it. So like, I could say like if h2 HTML equals subfatai alert. Yep. I don't know. That's really exciting. Why didn't that work? Oh, it's because I refreshed the page, so it's not subfatai anymore. But yeah, I mean, this is perfectly fine. So here I have a little bit of jQuery and a little bit of vanilla JavaScript. That's perfectly fine. It's really just when you're separating things with periods that you can't mix the two. When I say separating things with periods, I mean like up here. Here we have jQuery, period, vanilla JavaScript, period, jQuery, period, jQuery. And you can't do that. Up here, I have jQuery period, jQuery period, jQuery period, jQuery. That's perfectly fine. It's all jQuery, just separated by periods. Any other questions about that? So there's always going to be someone who's like, oh, you actually can do it. Like, and yes, there are some times when you can do inner HTML and like vanilla JavaScript things on jQuery. Like this will probably work. Well, okay, or maybe it won't. That's interesting. But there are going to be some times when, not like that, when you can like mix them together. The general rule is don't. Do not rely on being able to mix them together because most of the time it's not going to work. So just stay on one of the two sides of the table. But the important thing to remember is that jQuery is JavaScript. jQuery is just a bunch of JavaScript that has already been written for you. jQuery is not a separate language. It is JavaScript. It's just JavaScript that's already been written for you. We may say sometimes like, don't use jQuery, use JavaScript, and that's a misnomer. That's something we shouldn't be saying. We should be saying, don't use jQuery, use vanilla JavaScript, because it is all still JavaScript. Any other questions? Yeah?
More of an etiquette question. When it comes to single quotations and double quotations, if you're copying somebody else's library, do you try to mimic theirs or change it?
That's a really good question. I mean, for some reason, I like double quotes. I'm not really sure why. I don't think it really matters. I would say whatever floats your boat.
What's the difference between the two?
Really nothing. In other languages, there's more of a difference. In JavaScript, I don't think there's any difference at all.
Okay. Because I've seen people do both, but I thought maybe with certain types of grammar.
Yeah, like I know Jesse prefers single quotes because he doesn't have to type shift for them. For some reason, I like single quotes, even though I have to type shift for them. I don't know why. But yeah, in JavaScript, there's not a difference. In Ruby, there is. In JavaScript, there's not. Matt, did you have something? Yeah, I agree. I would say pick one and stick with it. It's just like, semicolons. If you're going to use semicolons, use semicolons. If you're not going to use semicolons, don't use semicolons. But just be consistent with it. Pick one and roll with it. All right. So with all of that done, the last thing I'm going to talk about, or second to last thing before I release you to work on something else, you can actually pass more than just a string into jQuery. So let's see. Let me make sure I'm in the right place. So here I'm passing in h2, and it gives me every h2. If you have something that is not already a jQuery object, so here I'm just going to call it L for element, and I'm going to get first h2 on the page. So L.html, that's not going to work. But what I can do is I can turn this regular old DOM element into a jQuery element. And I can do that just by wrapping it in cache. L.html. And that takes that regular old element and turns it into a jQuery element. So anytime you wrap something in cache, that's our mnemonic for it. Anytime you put something into $signs, it's going to turn it into a jQuery object. And it could be a string, it could be an element. You can put it inside that $sign, and it'll turn it into a jQuery object.
So question, after the $sign, it's going to always be followed by parentheses?
Mm-hmm. Yep, $sign is a function, so you have to call it just like a function.
And then you said it can be a $sign or underscore.
No, not underscore. Underscore is something different. It can be either $sign or jQuery, like this. Oops, sorry, that's up at the bottom of the screen. There. So jQuery and $sign are the exact same thing. It's just $sign is 5 letters shorter. Underscore is a different thing. So if I try to do underscore right now, it's not going to work. All right. So now the actual last thing I want to talk about is what do you do if you get a whole bunch of H2s back, but like let's say I just want to change the first one on here, or let's say the second one on here. One thing that's kind of confusing about my blog, the first post is called my 5th post, and the second one is called my 4th. They go in like reverse order, so sorry about that. We should probably change that. But let's say I wanted to get this second one on here. What could I do? So I'm getting back an array. What would I do if I wanted to get the second thing in an array? Matt? Yeah, so I could do that. And that's pretty cool. But if I look at this carefully, I can see that this is actually not a jQuery object anymore. This is just a regular old DOM element. So if you want to if you want this to stay a jQuery object, you can do one of two things. You can wrap the entire thing in cache. So I could do this, but that's kind of ugly. The other thing you can do is use .eq1. So instead of using square brackets, you use .eq. And then if I inspect this thing closely, I should see that it is a jQuery object. So here's another one of the things I'm going to put on here is .eq is the jQuery method for square brackets. And I think it's EQ for equals, I don't know. But I mean, it starts off with 0 the exact same way array brackets does. All it does is it just takes this thing, it takes one thing out of that array and it keeps it as a jQuery element. So I could do something like h2.eq1.html, and it'll just give me the HTML of the second one on the page. And I can just keep changing things together if I want. Oops. Any questions about that? I'm gonna let you like practice with this for the next little bit. But before I do that, any questions? All right, so let's get you guys working with this stuff. I'd just like you to do part 2 of the blog. So if you go back to the README, that is, do I have it open? Yeah, here we go. That's this guy right here. So it's almost the exact same thing, except instead of using getElementById and whatever, you're only allowed to use these 3. Any questions about what you're doing? Cool. I will give you, I'll start off with 10 minutes, and if we need more time at the end of that, then I'll extend it. Notice that there are 2 bonus questions down here. Don't really worry if you can't get those, because they're not too important.